Okay, image of the warrior Pharaoh in New Kingdom Egypt from Amenhotep III to the death of Ramses II. So, the mighty warrior Pharaoh is one of the most enduring images of ancient Egypt and dates around to the beginning of the civilization itself, which was 3000 BC. It was both a political and religious statement and emphasized the king's role as the divine upholder of Maat. They needed to maintain peace, and it was also an Egyptian concept of order to have their Pharaoh be seen as a warrior. So, what images come to your mind when you hear the word warrior Pharaoh? You might think of smiting scenes. You might think of pharaohs being pictured larger than life in chariots. You might picture them giving tribute or as a god. All of those things are relevant to this warrior Pharaoh image. So the image is usually the king triumphing over the forces of chaos, represented by foreign enemies and bound captives. So therefore, the Pharaoh is Maat, and the foreign enemies and the captives are, chaos. So they're Isfet. In earlier times, the king, a distant and mysterious being, was held in godlike awe by his subjects. However, by New Kingdom times, he was a more earthly, vulnerable figure who fought alongside his troops in battles. So this is what's different about the New Kingdom warrior Pharaoh image, is they're not mysterious and godlike and a step away from normal society. They're normal people who fight along their troops and can be a little bit more relatable for the Egyptian society. So the militarism of the New Kingdom era brought this new heroic age, and we start to see the chariot be added to this image of the warrior Pharaoh, remembering that the chariot was introduced by the Hyksos, who invaded in the early 18th dynasty. So from the time of the expulsion of the Hyksos, the main role of the king was that of the warrior Pharaoh, the protector of Egypt. The main symbol of this role was the Sphinx, often depicted as the Pharaoh in the Sphinx form, trampling the traditional enemies of Egypt, the Nubians and the Asiatics. So pharaohs learnt the new skills of a warrior, such as archery, charioteering, and managing horses very early in life. Chariots and weaponry and this warrior Pharaoh image. So, for example, in Tut's tomb, there were many artifacts of warfare, such as chariots, weapons, bows, arrows, and shields. All of those things were found in his tomb and go towards that idea of this warrior pharaoh image, that even they had to be buried with these items to show that they were warrior pharaohs. The god Seth is a very common motif for pharaohs to use. They associate themselves with warrior gods like Seth, who are shown particularly for Tut, tutoring the young king in matters of warfare. So the gods that relate to war and fighting and all those kinds of things, they are shown in more scenes tutoring the pharaohs. Abu Simbel, at Abu Simbel, you have Seth watching over Ramses II at the Battle of Kadesh. This is that to contribute to this idea of the warrior pharaoh. So the diplomacy and warrior pharaoh image. So as the 18th dynasty progressed, it became less important for the kings to lead their armies into battle, as both the north and south were relatively peaceful, as with Amenhotep III's reign. So the question began as to how are we going to perpetuate this image of the warrior pharaoh when we're not actually fighting any battles. So even though these pharaohs who relied upon other methods of diplomacy, such as international marriage, diplomatic marriage, they still displayed themselves as warrior pharaohs and as maintaining the armies and forts and garrisons in other ways. So they likened themselves to Montu, the god of war, and in his mortuary temple he depicted himself as drawing his chariot over the enemies. Even though we know there aren't many recorded battles in his reign, he still depicts himself in this way. He still associates himself with Montu because this idea of a warrior pharaoh was so important. Symbols and epithets that go with the warrior pharaoh. Some of them, like Akhenaten, who was criticized for having a lack of military enterprise, yet he still depicted himself in that warrior pharaoh image, such as with the blue war crown. He used militaristic language and maintained military officials in his bureaucracy. Now, in the back of this PowerPoint, and you'll see in this picture here, this is actually Amenhotep III wearing the blue war crown, the kepresh. However, there is a statue of Akhenaten wearing the same one, even though we know, due to his focus on the religious revolution, he didn't have many battles to fight, yet he still portrayed himself in this warrior pharaoh image, using symbols such as the war crown. I As we know, very short reign, didn't have many battles, yet he still used the epithet, which is something that you use, I guess, in death to describe, put on your tombstone. His was subduer of Asia, even though there's no evidence for campaigns in his brief reign for Asia. He still calls himself the subduer of Asia, thus perpetuating this need to be a warrior pharaoh. So conquest and the warrior pharaoh image. So we both know that Seti and Ramses II did have battles and conquest, and they emphasized the renewal of the role of the military pharaoh, and their reliefs display scenes of conquest. And you can probably picture a lot of their scenes involved chariots, battles, where they are not wearing armor, where they are fighting the enemies who are smaller, much smaller than they are, and they're doing it almost single-handedly. So this whole New Kingdom warrior pharaoh image, it did have like criteria, I guess essential requirements, and some of these were to have a warrior pharaoh image, you needed to have an image of yourself leading soldiers into battle and returning in victory, attacking an enemy while riding a chariot, wearing war regalia like the blue war crown or other pharaonic headrests such as this crown here with Amenhotep III, which pictures the copper on the top. They often needed to be depicted larger than life, holding one or more of the enemy in their hand, and then a club to club their brains out with a mace. Also notice the smiting the enemy scene. Also, you might have an image of them guised as a sphinx, trampling the enemies underfoot, or offering spoils of war to the god Amun, the inspiration for his victory. So this is something that they would have, these sort of things they use to perpetuate this warrior pharaoh image. So this is an image of the Tablet of Victory, which was a battle against the Nubians. And you can see here that it's Amenhotep III on a chariot with a horse with a bow and arrow. And he's depicted larger than life, so is his horse, defeating Isfet. He represents Mard, he's defeating Isfet for Egypt. Here we have Pharaoh Amenhotep III at the Luxor temple making offerings to the god Amun. This also perpetuates that warrior pharaoh image because he's wearing the blue war crown and he's giving the spoils of war to Amun to say, this is, I fought for you, I fought for Ma, and these are the gifts that I'm giving to you. And this is a limestone statue of Akhenaten wearing the blue crown holding an offering table. You can see here the blue Kepresh, and you can even still see the actual blue colour to it. This is a painted wood box from Tut's tomb, which shows him vanquishing Nubians, and you can see that they're Nubians by the darkness of their skin. He appears strong, larger than life. You've got motifs here of the various gods. Montu, I think, is pictured here with the wings, and the blue war crown, and you've got the chariot and the horse, and he's larger than life with his armor and bow and arrow defeating the Nubians. You can see the Nubians are really small compared to him. Then we've also got a relief at Karnak of Seti battling the Libyans. He's not wearing any armor, blue war crown. You've got the horse, you've got him defeating the enemies, which are pictured a lot smaller than he is on the chariot. Remember, he represents Ma'at, they represent Isfet. Everything that's gone bad is Isfet, they are Ma'at. This is another one of Pharaoh Seti in a battle relief at Karnak, and he is smiting the enemy, the typical smiting scene where they hold them by the head and the mace in the hand to club them to death. There's another one of Ramses II in Memphis, and it's him smiting Semnites and a black Nubian. Again, wearing the blue war crown to contribute to this concept of him maintaining Ma'at for Egypt. So changes to the image of the pharaoh in this period. So the prestige of the Egyptian kings, which had suffered as a result of the Hyksos domination, was restored with the success of Ahmose over the invaders, which was the Hyksos when he defeated them. So by the Middle Kingdom, the image of the good shepherd looking after his flock was then replaced with the divine warlord, a warrior god of heroic proportions. So the warrior god king, the king as a god from the earliest times, the Egyptian king was believed to be earthly form of Horus, son of Ra, Horus and Osiris, the king becoming Horus and ascending to the throne when Osiris died. During the New Kingdom, the pharaoh was regarded in a different way and more associated with Amun-Ra or warrior gods like Montu and Seth, and this is to contribute back to that warrior pharaoh. So the image in New Kingdom changes so that it relates to Amun-Ra or Montu and Seth. So the incarnation of Montu was often depicted at this time wearing feathers of Amun in battle with the wings of Montu, like we saw in that picture previously. So they often will be giving gifts to Amun or have the wings of Montu with them. So the relationship with their father of Amun-Ra was really important for this warrior pharaoh image as well. So the king's relationship with his father Amun-Ra is illustrated in birth scenes on walls, such as at Hatshepsut's or Amenhotep III's at Luxor. The scenes depict divine marriage between Amun in the guise of the pharaoh and the queen consort, and the conception finally taking birth with the birth of the child, which takes place in a large number of gods in front of them. So Amun recognizes the child and promises it millions of years. Now that initial divine birth scene is really important to that warrior pharaoh image, because it's really important that you have that relationship with Amun-Ra for the new kingdom warrior pharaoh image to perpetuate from there. So it starts with the divine birth scene where they are birthed from Amun-Ra. So this, for example, and I think I've spoken to you guys about the symbol of the R as being an impregnation thing. So this is Amun-Ra here, and this is Hatshepsut. And you can see that Amun-Ra is impregnating Hatshepsut with her child, who we hope will be the king. And when she gives birth to that king, they will become the pharaoh. And that is the divine birth scene. That is to symbolize that Amun-Ra has impregnated the mother with the warrior pharaoh that already has established that relationship with Amun-Ra, because Amun-Ra has fathered this son. So, sorry, this is not Hatshepsut. This is Queen Mutemwa. This is the future mother of Amenhotep III. And she is going to give birth to her warrior pharaoh son. So God-King responsibilities. One of the responsibilities of the God-King was to defend the land against the physical threats and confront evil or chaotic forces, Isfet. So the tradition of the Pharaoh as the smasher of heads continued during the New Kingdom. So that smiting scenes continue. The towering king was shown striding forward, grasping in his left hand the hair of a captive or captives, while the mace head or scimitar in his right hand was about to beat the enemy's brains out, and no one could hope to resist the divine ruler. So this is an image of Ramesses II killing the Syrian victim, while God hands him the sickle sword. The king as a warrior. Most pharaohs of the New Kingdom were war leaders. Some were true warrior kings who extended the boundaries north and south. Others simply directed or participated in campaigns, only in the first few years of their reigns. However, this was enough to maintain Egyptian power abroad and to reinforce the tradition of the warrior king who had divine support and approval. Almost all New Kingdom pharaohs took an interest in recruiting an army of their troops, whether they personally led them or not. Superhuman qualities. Except in the case of Hatshepsut, the court writers and artists of the day focus on superhuman qualities of the god king. No king could not have superhuman qualities. No matter what the abilities of the individual pharaoh or the incidents of history, the pharaoh was always shown larger than life in the midst of the battle. Alone in his chariot, he had reins fastened around his waist so that both hands were free for the fight. He was vastly outnumbered but needed no help from his forces. His arrows always found their mark, and the enemy was utterly powerless against him. All of these war scenes demonstrate that concept of him doing it single-handedly, and he is a godlike figure with superhuman qualities. Even though he's still relatable, he's still relatable to the people in this New Kingdom period. So the warlike image of the New Kingdom pharaohs was reflected in their names. So some of these don't relate to us, such as Thutmose III and Amenhotep III, but if you have a look at the name of Amenhotep III, you've got great in strength, smiter of the Asiatics. For Seti, you've got strong arms, subduing the foe, mighty bows. So even in their names, they're making links to that warrior pharaoh. A protector of Egypt who curbs the foreign lands, Ramesses II. In their names, you've got links to the warrior pharaoh. Okay, the image was further enhanced by constant associations with Montu, who's the god of war, which I spoke to you about before, and he's of Thebes. So the addition of the blue war crown to the collection of royal regalia. This blue leather crown covered with gold studs was not only worn into battle, but whenever the pharaoh wanted to emphasize his warlike powers and military feats. Decoration which featured Negroes and Asiatics on the base of the king's throne or footstool under the pharaoh's feet. So if they wanted to show, I guess, that they had power over the Asiatics or the Nubians as a symbol, they would put them on the bottom of the stool to symbolize their inferiority. Is that a word? How inferior they are. And this is, for example, one taken from Tut's stool, which he depicts I think it might be a Nubian, on the bottom of his stool, sort of to indicate that he's subjugated them. So the following extract describes the superhuman actions of the Pharaoh Amenhotep III. And so remember we spoke about those superhuman, well, I spoke about those superhuman qualities. So, good God, Lord of the sword, mighty in dragging them alongside his chariot, annihilating their heir to the wretched Cush, taking their princes prisoner. The good God, golden horror, shining in the chariot like the rising of the sun, great in strength, strong in might, mighty-hearted like him who dwells in Thebes, mighty Montu, smiting Naharin with his mighty sword. So he's talking here about, I guess, what he's capable of doing in battle and blah, blah, blah. And obviously talking about how he goes about doing it and the gods that he's associated, such as it mentions here Montu. So those associations with Montu are really important. So having prowess with a bow was also important for that heroic image and was repeated in records of the pharaohs hunting forays against lions, wild cattle, and even elephants. And so when you see those images of them fighting, hunting, that's all contributing to that warrior pharaoh image. The pharaoh was always looking magnificent in his chariot, disposed of wild beasts charging at him. No one could equal his prowess with a bow. This is another source. Now, the following extract, it comes from the monumental inscription at the temples of Abydos, Luxor, and Karnak. I won't read through all of it, but please pause and have a read through and have a look for the, I guess the parts here where he's what elements is he associating himself with? Are there mention of superhuman qualities? Is there mention of gods? Are there gods mentioned? What abilities does he have as a pharaoh? What is he going to do as the pharaoh to protect the people? What elements of might can be maintained just from reading this text? And see what you can do with that. Each pharaoh depicted the image of the warrior pharaoh king in a different way, and many of these warrior kings were associated with outstanding queens who played a prominent role in public life. Okay, so please have notes on this PowerPoint and know what this warrior pharaoh image consists of in this New Kingdom era, in this New Kingdom pharaoh era. Thank you. How do I stop it?